everyone, welcome back to the flight team recapping day 10 of the Men's World Championship happening in Herning, Denmark and Stockholm, Sweden. So hop into it today, of course, the scores from today's game, starting with a 3-2 shootout win for Austria over Slovenia. Now, this was a game that I think for Austria, they will look back on at the end of this tournament and say, well, if only we would have got those points. And very similarly, we kind of saw that today for a team like Slovakia, where they are now out, and we'll talk about Slovakia, the Slovak game in just a little bit here, but, you know, for Austria, they now will have to beat Latvia in regulation and not just beat them, and I think that's where you could see these sort of games become a thorn in their side. And for Austria today, they dominated this game. They dominated this game from start to finish, but unfortunately, another late lead that just seems to fizzle away. And for this Austrian team, it's been, you know, whether it's the game against Sweden, which I think they'll look back on if they don't end up making the quarters at this tournament and say, well, that should have been a game that we won. And all of a sudden, you know, they win that game, and this tournament is very much different for them. You know, for Latvia, for Austria rather, it's one of those games that I just think that is kind of a storyline of this tournament where they're giving up late leads. Look at the Slovakia game as well, where it was very much similar. And for Austria, they've played a great tournament, and they've been involved in just about every game they've played, and they've been close with just about every game they've played. But it's these little moments that kind of define the game, and that's what they've really been struggling with. And I think, you know, for this Austrian team today, it's minor details. You know, it's the penalty that you see the penalty get taken, and before the ref puts his hand up, you pass the puck away, and then that leads to the second goal. It's that split second of, you know, you hold on to that puck for a little bit longer, and all of a sudden it's not a goal, but it's a penalty, and all of a sudden you're killing it off just like you've done all game. So for Austria today, they had their chances, and even into the overtime period. For Slovenia, as soon as the game hit overtime, the game really didn't mean anything for them. They still have to beat France. You get the point, which allows you to win in either overtime or a shootout as well as regulation. You know, so for Slovenia, whether they win that game or lose that game really doesn't mean much aside from maybe for their pride. But I think for Slovenia, they showed themselves well at this game, and you look to the game they're going to play, and they're going to play the French, and the France is a team that is going to play fairly similar to how Austria is, and I think that kind of goes to show that, you know, this Slovenian team can compete and has a shot to get themselves out of that relegation game, where before, you know, you look at the first couple games of the tournament, you can even go rewatch those videos, you may have counted them out. So, you know, for Slovenia, a well-played game today. For Austria, another well-played game as well. You know, both teams, as much as Austria controlled the pace, I thought Slovenia did a good job at limiting their chances. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to the goaltending. So for Slovenia, looking to build that momentum into their eventual relegation deciding game against France. For Austria, it's a big game coming up, and now you gotta really come to play. So that was the first game of the day. And then we'll move to the second game of the day between Latvia and Slovakia. And Latvia won this one 5-1. And what I will say is that you look at the first half of the first period of this game, and you're watching that and you're saying, wow, Slovakia is going to dominate them in this one. You know, what was this channel saying yesterday about how it was going to be a close game? He was so full of it. And then something switched, and we saw Latvia completely dominate the rest of this game. And Slovakia didn't even have too many great chances. Start of the third period, I'll give you that. But, you know, outside of that sort of 10-minute mark of the third period, there wasn't much. And, you know, in a game that means a lot. And now that Slovakia is now eliminated, it's one that is going to hurt them a lot. And I think you look at this tournament, yes, coming in, they weren't the Slovak team of old. They're missing a lot of their NHL players. That was going to hurt them. You know, I think I was one of the people that kind of said, you know, the Slovakian team isn't going to be great. But I thought that even coming into this game, I would have expected a push, a desperation moment. And there really just wasn't any of that. And I thought for Latvia, they did a really good job at sort of stifling that momentum coming back the other way, and those counter rushes, which then ended up turning into counter rushes for Latvia coming on the other side. And I think that's exactly what Latvia needs to do against this Austrian team coming up is, if you can stifle their offensive chances and continue to play that structured game, it's not going to last long, and I think Latvia should win this one handedly. But if you let teams like Slovakia or Austria come back in games, they're going to burn you. So for Latvia, this was an excellent game played today from them. They secure a huge 3 points in the Group A standings towards making the fourth quarterfinal spot in Group A. It's going to be interesting because, that was a very big win today for Latvia, and even worse loss for Slovakia, where they'll get knocked out of the tournament. But we'll move now to the news, and we'll start here with Austria with the Bleeding Twos. And remember, with the Iihf, it's the 3-2-1-0 system in terms of the point structure. And we've seen Austria at this tournament continue to sort of give up leads in the third period, and that's really hurt them at this tournament. And you might look back on it at the end and say, well, if they would have got that point and that point, all of a sudden, it could have been a very different tournament. So for Austria, the Bleeding Twos are kind of the storyline for them. And as much as, yes, you still have to beat, you're still going to have to beat Latvia, it's a lot more difficult to beat a team in regulation, especially a team like Latvia, where they'll play that structured game because they know they're already up 1 goal as a tied game. So we'll see kind of which team comes out to play. I think you will see a desperate Austrian team, but one that has been picking up momentum all tournament long, and now it's just about playing their full 60-minute game and seeing what kind of game you get out of Latvia, because Latvia is, of course, favored on paper, but I think it'll be a lot tighter than most people might think. Then to the second one we go here for Slovenia with now or never, and when we look at the Slovenian team, it's now or never, and now it's time to play your game and find the back of the net against the French, and if you can beat France, you're in and you stay alive at this tournament for 1 year longer. If you lose, you're done. And we'll talk more about this in tomorrow's video. Obviously, we'll talk about this one a little bit later in this video, rather, because it's now or never. And you're going to play France tomorrow. You're going to need a big win, and there's no getting around it that you're going to need that win. So for Slovenia, now or never. We'll see which team ends up in the relegation spot. There's some pretty good games tomorrow, especially that's going to determine, what we're going to see in the relegation, but really could go either way. And then to Slovakia we go with crushed. And for Slovakia, this was a tournament that had a lot of question marks around it. Even into the quarters, or even at the start of this tournament, there were way too many question marks to really decide, what to expect from this team. And I think a lot of those question marks turned into thumbs down. And I think when you look at it in that way, Slovakia just had a rough tournament, and they lost the games that mattered. They lost against Austria. They lost some of the tight games that they could have won. And I think, you even look at sort of their start where they played Sweden and got blown out. And I think that was a real telltale sign for what was to come at this tournament. So for Slovakia, they are crushed after today's loss. And I think you kind of look at the way that the rest of the day has gone, and it's just been an unfortunate end to this one, where all of a sudden, Slovenia beats Austria. All of a sudden, the tiebreaker could be a lot more interesting. So for Slovakia, a crushed day, very difficult, and really an unfortunate one, tournament-wise for the Slovaks. And now you sort of set your sights on the Olympics. Obviously, when we look at the team, they're going to have a little bit more NHL help coming, and I think that's really where you're going to see them sort of find their way a little bit better, but you really never know. And for Slovakia, if they play like they did at this tournament, they're going to struggle. So for Slovakia today, they were crushed. And as for Latvia, they're winning, they're in. And for the quarterfinal spot, it's a win and you're in kind of scenario. And once you make the quarterfinals, anything can happen. And I think what we've seen from this Latvian team is it really does come down to which game they play. And I think in many ways, what we've seen from this team is their scores haven't really reflected how they've played. And as much as, in some senses, yes, but you look at the way Latvia's played at this tournament, and they've played well enough, at least in my opinion, they've played well enough to be a lot higher in the standings than what they are right now. You even look at that Finland game just the other day where they played an exceptional game, just lost that. And I think when you look at what's ahead, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Denmark-Germany scenario, how if Denmark does get the 4th spot and all of a sudden Sweden wins the group against Canada, then all of a sudden it's not as black and white as A1, B4. It's actually going to be A1, A4, where Latvia is going to have to play a team like a Canada or Sweden, or I guess Sweden would be in the top spot, so they'd have to play the Swedes. And I think that's the kind of game that you want to see from Latvia. And I think you look at Group B, if everything holds itself and, Canada either wins the group or Denmark doesn't make the quarters, I think you look at who they might be playing and you're looking at a team like the Czechs, or you're looking at a team like Switzerland. And I think Latvia can beat those teams, and I don't think it's as black and white as some people might think. But that'll do it here for our news in Group A. When I move over to Group B, a little bit less to talk about here. A 6-1 victory for the USA over Kazakhstan. This was ugly. Yes, it looks tight. It wasn't tight. The US outplayed Kazakhstan for the back 2 periods. The first period, 0-0 game through it. I thought Kazakhstan looked okay in that. But as the game went onwards, you could just see the U.S. picking it up. And unfortunately for Kazakhstan, they're going to need to get lucky at this tournament. And you kind of think about what's to come, and it's not looking great. It really isn't looking great for Kazakhstan to get out of the relegation spot. Yes, they have a shot, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But, for Kazakhstan, they're looking like they're headed to the relegation game despite beating Norway at the very start of this tournament, which is kind of what we talked about. It's the game that matters. They lost against Hungary, and they lost pretty badly at that game. And then all of a sudden, now is the fallout of now we're scrounging for points, and it's going to be a difficult ride back. So 6-1 USA and Kazakhstan. Switzerland, Hungary, 10-0 final. I don't have too much to say. I will let the score speak for itself on this one. It was a blowout game. Yeah, that does it. I got nothing else for that one. Then to the news we go with the USA for In Our Hands. And now for the US, it's about where you end up seeding-wise. And I think for this US team, they're a team that, despite all odds, and they haven't played great, they lose to Switzerland, and they struggle against, they blew a 5-1 lead to Norway. They nearly lost to Germany the other day after blowing a 3-goal lead. They have it in their hands to be at basically second spot in the group on their own. And then with a little help from our friends in Kazakhstan, you very well could see the U.S. in the top spot. Highly doubtful. That would mean that, of course, Switzerland would have to lose in regulation to Switzerland would have to lose to Kazakhstan in regulation. Not likely to happen. But I just think that all of a sudden, this U.S. team is still alive at this tournament. And you look at how these seedings are going to work out. And what I will say is, as much as I originally predicted, Sweden to beat Canada, I want to see this Canada-Finland game tomorrow before I make too many more calls about, the top of Group A. But I just think that you look at kind of what's going on there, it could be, you're probably not seeing the A1, A4 matchups. You're probably going to see A1, B4. And so for the U.S., if you can avoid Canada and Sweden, you can play a team like Finland or Latvia or Austria. You'd much rather play those teams and not have to worry about it. So for the U.S., they have a big game coming up against the Czechs. Most likely decide the second spot in Group B. You get to play the easier opponent in the Finns, assuming nothing crazy happens, which honestly, you really never know at this tournament because there's been a lot of wild cards, and all of a sudden Canada loses to Finland, then they lose to Sweden. Then all of a sudden you really don't want that second spot in Group B. So for this U.S. team, it's in their hands to find themselves into the better positioning for the quarterfinals. We'll see if they take it. Then to Kazakhstan we go with Go Hungary. And you might be wondering, why is Kazakhstan cheering on Hungary? And the reason why is that if you look at it, for Kazakhstan, their last hope is to get a point out of Switzerland. Switzerland, the best team at this tournament, they just smoked, they smoked Hungary 10-0 today. At the team that beat you 4-5-1. It's not a good look. It's really not a good look. And I highly doubt they'll get those points. which means that their last hope is going to be going through the, seeing Hungary get a point out of Norway tomorrow. And if Hungary can find a point, then all of a sudden Kazakhstan's in, and they'll be happy. They'll be in next year's tournament. If they don't, if Norway can win in regulation, then all of a sudden it's crunch time and they need a point against Switzerland, which, to be frank, isn't looking great. Yes, Switzerland's sitting some of their players, but even that, I don't think will be enough for this Kazakh team to find their way through. So for Kazakhstan, they need Hungary to find themselves a point tomorrow against Norway. We'll see if that happens. We'll talk a little bit more about that game in just a little bit. Then to Hungary we go with, we're chilling. Yep, we're chilling. We're chilling. For Hungary, they're a team at this tournament that won their game that matters, and now they wait and see what fate decides for them. 10-0. Big whoop. They weren't making the quarterfinals anyway. Would have been nice to get a point and, kind of get yourself out of that range. Sure. But I think that for Hungary, they've done everything they've needed to. Now it's just letting fate decide what's to come for them. And I think you look at what's to come for Kazakhstan, it's very difficult. Yes, they'll play Norway tomorrow. Will they get a point? Who knows? But I think for Hungary, they've done everything they needed to at this tournament to avoid relegation, which was their big thing, and B, keep their country proud, which I think is the other thing that they've done a very good job of. So for Hungary, they're chilling, they'll be okay, and now it's just a matter of what's to come with fate as to whether or not Kazakhstan can get out of the group. And then for Switzerland with Go USA, for Switzerland, they're looking for that top spot in Group B, and I think when you look at it, if you can avoid having to play, Finland, I know Finland's a team that's very much a dark horse, and yes, they aren't great this year and they haven't looked good, especially against some of the weaker teams, but Finland's a team that when it's time to play, they're ready to go. And I think you kind of saw that in that Sweden-Finland game where, yes, they got outplayed, but they were able to keep the game close enough to keep it within striking distance. 1 or 2 goals difference, for Finland, and that game could have been ended in a Finland finish win. And I think, when you look at it as the Swiss, you'd rather take that top spot, get to play a team like Latvia or Austria, rather than have to go through Finland. So you're cheering on Czechia or you're cheering on the U.S. in this one to beat the Czechs. If the U.S. can beat Czechia, then you can't end much less than first place. But in the same respect, you at the very least keep it within your control. The U.S. still, I think, in theory, could end up as the top spot in Group A or Group B rather. But that window is closing very fast, and you basically need Kazakhstan to beat Switzerland, which I don't think will happen. I think you'll see Switzerland beat Kazakhstan, and then all of a sudden it comes down to, for the Czechs, if they win out, that's how they're going to keep it. But, Switzerland's cheering on Germany. They're cheering on the USA. Any of those games happen, all of a sudden you're a lot safer. So for Switzerland, you're cheering on the other teams, hoping Germany or the US can pull off the upset against the Czechs. Should be interesting there. But we'll now move to the standings, and we'll start here in Group A, where we'll see Sweden in first place with 18 points, Canada in second with 15, Finland in third with 11, Latvia in fourth with 9, Austria in fifth with 7 points, Slovakia in sixth with 7. Reminder that Austria does hold the tiebreaker over Slovakia. Then you'll see France in seventh and Slovenia in eighth. Those two teams are tied. They're not one over the other. They're both with 1 point each. But for France and Slovenia, they will play each other tomorrow, and that one's going to more or less decide the relegation spot. And we'll also talk a little bit more about the rest of the match, or the rest of the standings in tomorrow's recap video, to sort of give you the guide of what to expect for the games to come in that sort of 4, 5, 6 range, or maybe even 3, depending on what happens with Canada and Finland. We could see Latvia and Slovakia, or we could see Latvia find themselves into the third spot, which could be interesting. But we'll talk about that in tomorrow's recap video, because we just don't have the time today, and the games are probably going to be more relevant to that scenario tomorrow, assuming nothing crazy happens. But we'll talk now here about Group B now. We'll see Switzerland in first place with 16 points, Czechia in second with 14, tied with the U.S., who's also at 14, Germany in fourth place with 9, Denmark in fifth place with 9 as well, Hungary in sixth place with 3 points, Kazakhstan in seventh with 3. Reminder that Hungary does own the tiebreaker over Kazakhstan head-to-head. And then lastly, Norway in last place with 1 point. And when we look at the bottom, For Group B, very similar thing where we'll see, of course, Norway and Hungary. They'll play each other coming up, and if Norway can find 3 points with the regulation win, they will hike over Hungary. They'll hike over Kazakhstan. Of course, Kazakhstan has the tiebreaker over Norway, so overtime isn't going to work for them, because if they get the 3 points, Hungary boots up to 4 points, and then you have a two-way tie between Kazakhstan and Norway. Kazakhstan holds the tiebreaker, which means Norway will be the team relegated. So you very well could see that empty net situation where, it's a tie game late against Hungary. Norway might pull their goalie because of that. So don't be surprised if that happens. They need the regulation win if they want to avoid relegation. So don't be surprised to see a tie game late in the third that they treat it as if they're down one, because they do need to force overtime in many ways. Then we will move to tomorrow's games, and we sort of already talked about it a little bit. France and Slovenia coming up at 10:20 a.m. Eastern, as well Canada and Finland at 2:20. France and Slovenia is going to be your game of the day in Group A. This game will determine the relegation spot, and the winner of it will not be relegated. The loser will be relegated, which means that these two teams are fighting for their lives, which means it's awesome hockey, because two teams fighting for their lives, they're going to bring it as best they can. So do not be surprised to see the guns firing on all accounts. And I think in many ways, this very well could be one of the best games we see at this tournament. Do not be surprised to see it go to overtime. Do not be surprised to see it go to a shootout, but also don't be surprised to see this game end in a blowout. The one thing we've seen with Slovenia at this tournament is they're very defensive. For France, they're also playing a very similar style, and I think if France can play the way they did against Finland, could be a tight game. If Slovenia, plays the way they did against a lot of the teams in Group A, they should be okay as well. And it's that interesting sort of thing where if you asked me at the start of the tournament, I would have told you France is going to win this game. But now that we've seen these two teams in action, I think it's a lot closer than most people might think. So, for France, must-win game. Slovenia, must-win game. Both teams in must-win, always going to be a good one. 10:20 a.m. Eastern, your game of the day in Group A. As for Canada and Finland, Finland's always a team that's caused some problems for Canada at these kind of tournaments. And, whether it's Four Nations, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's the World Championships, whether it's the Juniors, whatever tournament you might choose, it always comes down to these teams playing their styles of hockey. Canada plays a very North American style. Finland plays a very Finnish style of hockey. Just the way the two countries work, Finland designs their systems, and the Finnish style of hockey is designed to counter the Canadian North American style. Do not be surprised if this game remains close, especially late in this game, for Finland to put a scare into Canada, because that's just how it works with this Finnish team. But at the same time, this Finnish team isn't what they've been in years past. This Canadian team is much better from years past, so do not be surprised to also see Canada make a push on this Finnish team early and often in this game. But we've already seen Finland come close with Sweden. Very similar to how Canada's going to play against them. So don't be surprised to see this game be closer than most people might think. That'll be at 2:20 p.m. Eastern time. Also will be a game of the day. No real bad games of the day. And I think, but if you're looking at the standings and how it's going to work, my game of the day in Group A is going to be France and Slovenia. Don't let me say Finland one more time for France, because I do that way too often. But France and Slovenia will be your game of the day at 10:20 a.m. Eastern. Then to Group B, we will go with Czechia against Germany at 10:20 a.m. Eastern. And this is a game that I think is going to turn some heads. I think you're going to see Germany play the Czechs very tight. And I know a lot of people have been down on Germany after a real hot start because they've played the weaker teams, and all of a sudden Germany's not great because they've lost twice now. But the way Germany's been playing has shown themselves that they're able to compete with these higher end teams, and I think the Czechs are going to be no different. So don't be surprised to see Germany, especially if they can find their game early, to put a little bit of a scare into the Czechs here. And I think for the Czechs, it's about continuing their pressure and continuing to find opportunities off the rush. That's really going to help them in this one. 10:20 a.m. Eastern between Germany and Czechia, going to be a good one. Then to the second game of the day, and my eyes, the game of the day in Group B, between Norway and Hungary. Hungary, not much to play for here. If they get the point, great. They're out of the relegation worries. But if they lose in regulation, then once again, it's on Kazakhstan. to get a point against Switzerland rather, which is not an easy feat. And I think you look at the teams and how they've been playing at this tournament, it's a tough road to get a point against this Switzerland team. So for Kazakhstan, they're cheering on Hungary. If Hungary can win, or if Hungary can get any points in this game, then Kazakhstan's safe. But if Norway wins in regulation, which I would expect, don't be surprised to see Kazakhstan in a last-minute panic as they try and get themselves out of the relegation spot on the day after as well. So penultimate day of action coming from the Men's Worlds. Your games of the day in Group A, France and Slovenia. In Group B, Norway and Hungary. It's going to be a good one. Be sure to come back tomorrow as we break down all the games, as well as preview the next day of action. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you'd like to share, subscribing, tell all your friends and comment down below your thoughts on Day 10 of the Men's World Championship. Until next time, see you.